Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Hey, Tricia.
Hi.
So, Tricia, super excited to have you today at SX Live. I just mentioned your name multiple times during my keynote. Hopefully,
I heard.
Hopefully, you had a chance to view it. So, for folks who are tuning in a little late, I want to do a quick short intro about Tricia. So, Tricia is one of my favorite TED speaker. She has given a talk on thick data, human insights from thick data. You can Google it. You'll find it. Amazing talk. Highly recommend watching it outside of this SX Live presentation. I met Tricia in 2017 in France. I attended a conference, and the subject matter that you discuss is so near and dear to my heart. So I'm thrilled to have you. And Tricia, I'm not going to do just justification for your intro, so please feel free to introduce yourself and a little bit of a background, and then dive into your presentation. And I'll come back for Q&A.
Thank you to the amazing team that is working behind the scenes and coaching everyone. My name is Tricia Wang, and because this is kind of, I think, unfair when you're in a virtual setting that you can't really actually talk to the people. And what I love about conferences, especially of these kind where it's really about gathering an entire industry and function, is that I get to learn from you all. And so I think that kind of sucks that I can't do that. But so here's my Instagram and my Twitter. If there's any questions you have during my talk, please just feel free to DM me, or if you see anything that resonates with you, feel free to screenshot and then post it online. It's just as if we were in real life, but I'm super excited to be here. It's really cool that I got to, meet Krishna a while back. I don't even know how many years we decided it was. But in the early days when he and the team were just starting SupportLogic, and it's incredible to see where the technology has advanced and that they, are truly an AI native company. And as these AI native companies are, they grow much faster. And now we're in a time where it's we don't have to convince the public what is AI now. And it is so, Chat GPT is truly the AOL moment of our time, that now you see all these memes, everywhere, amongst people people's grandmas are sharing, people's moms and grandparents, people of all ages know what a chatbot is. They know what Chat GPT is. They know that AI could be scary or it could be a savior. And one of my favorite ones that I have collected, I collect these, is when you thought you could get Chat GPT to write your assignment, but then you realize that you have to double check all their work. So this brings me to the topic of, how do we leverage AI in our work, right? And in particular, I'm super excited that, SupportLogic has created this community, because they're right. I've spoken at so many conferences as someone who advises companies in cross-functionally. As Sudden Compass, a company I co-founded and where I run, is we advise chief product officers, chief data officers, that, or even CEOs, or the board will bring us in. We'll work with the marketing function. We'll work with the research or the insights function, and we'll even work with the engineering function at times. And one of the biggest, I think, holes, in all the areas I've worked in, is consistently, regardless of what conference I've spoken at, the customer support function was never elevated and central to the work. It was always us pushing the company to say, hey, who's closest to your customers? Who are the people who hear day in and day out, who are on the front lines of experiencing when your customer is excited about something and they want an improvement in the future, or when they are upset when something is not right, And so it's usually the customer support service, but there was never a community for them. And so I'm super excited that, to share, when Krishna contacted me, he was like, hey, would you be able to tell us a bit about what you've learned at Sudden Compass through the years of advising companies? And in particular, he knew that I had this whole passion of making sure that anyone who is close to the customer, which happens to be, customer support teams consistently, to elevate their work, and not just elevate, but to make it the most strategic function. And I really believe that as we have more AI native tools to support enterprises, that this customer support function will become more central as more things become automated, as recommendation algorithms and curation algorithms, start to, continually improve and get trained. Over time, what's going to happen is that companies are going to say, wait, like we actually need more context to make use of what, these machines are recommending to us. So I would love to share some of the insights that we have learned through our last decade of working with companies and seeing how some companies have succeeded in creating customer-centric organizations and some haven't. So my background is I'm a tech ethnographer. It's okay if you have never heard this term. I totally made it up. Ethnography is the scientific study of people, and I loved watching what people do with technology, especially in the areas of data, design, and digital. And we worked with clients from all across different kinds of industries, from Fortune 500 companies to startups like Spotify or Kickstarter when they're in their Series B, or to Procter and Gamble, where they are well established Fortune 100 companies. And we work deeply in the areas around agile and product and marketing, bring functions together. And, really the topic of today, what I want to answer by the end of our chat and have some time to, ask questions from y'all, is the question that we get asked the most right now and that we advise on the most is, how do we create customer-centric organizations that truly leverage the power of data? And this has become an increasingly pressing question because data is moving from being treated as a cost for organizations to being an asset. And so whereas before it was just like, oh, this is not a revenue generator, we have to collect, make a database, we have to collect information about our customers to enable whatever. Data is now being seen as like, this is the asset for us to do all this other stuff. It is the platform. It is, without the data of our customers and our transactions and the way our company operates, we literally could not grow and scale. And as a result, data is now everywhere. It's in all functions. So the next question we often get asked is, well, how do you know if you're ready to take advantage of data as an asset for your organization? In particular, I think, Krishna and the team were telling me there's a wide variety of levels at this conference. And this is a question that is top of mind for, a C-suite leader to, a manager, to people of all positions, is how do you actually know that you're ready? Now, I want to say something very controversial. If we were here in person, I usually hear like gasps in the audience. But most of us, so I'm just preparing you all, is that most of us believe that the more big data that we have, the more data that we have, the better decisions we will make. And data is the fuel for anything we do with AI. It is the fuel. So what I'm here to share with you and to try and, really get us to think about is that not necessarily that having more data, which is the basis of any kind of software services that you have, is that it does not automatically lead to better decisions, higher profits, or even more customers. And so here's an exercise we can all do on the screen here. It's actually much easier to do. Sometimes I do this in person. It doesn't really work. But, here's on your screen this exercise I do, which is cover your left eye with your hands and just stare at the crosshairs and lean, just crosshairs that mark. Now lean your face forward and just see what happens when you lean into the screen. Watch what disappears. All right, I'm doing this with you to confirm. And this happens even if you kind of like put something on the right hand side. So what should have happened is that the dot on the right hand side of your screen, the black dot, should have disappeared. Now, I do this exercise to show you that like we all have blind spots. No matter what, when you're leaning very much on one eye here in this case, and literally, it's easy to miss something to have this blind spot. And it happens in real life all the time. Like when you're driving, if you're really focused on the thing that's in front of you, when you're looking just straight ahead, sometimes people will be like, well, that car came out of nowhere, right? It's because it didn't really come out of nowhere, but it's because your brain was so focused and really focused on using this tool or whatever that perspective you're trying to focus on, that you kind of missed the signals coming in. And this is what's exciting about, AI tools like that SupportLogic has built, is that enabling companies to pick up on the signals to be able to make the right predictions and to curate the most relevant information. And we want these tools because we want to make all the right decisions with data, especially data as a basis for any kind of machine learning or AI products. But the issue with, our human fallibility is that it's still humans using this product, and it should be humans using the product, is that we have blind spots. And as a result, investing in data is really easy, but using it is really hard. It's very easy to say, well, I'm going to use this tool and it's going to help me do XYZ. The same thing with, we went through phases after big data was a thing, and then it was like machine learning, right? Investing in machine learning is easy, but using it hard. Investing in AI is easy, but using it is actually super hard. And investing in, software is easy. And we can replace the sentence with whatever thing that the management thinks is the thing that's going to help them solve all their problems. Here is a study that I really like that was done out of a collaboration with several universities that show just why it's so hard. And what this study shows, we're going to do this together, but the big takeaway is that ahead of time is that computing intelligence struggles with context. You can have the most perfect data set and it would still struggle with context. So here's an example where the bunch of researchers gathered and did a study where it's like, okay, clearly we all know this is a stop sign, right? And having computer vision in any kind of self-driving car is super important. But why is it that self-driving cars are not fully autonomous? And that is because self-driving car, it's very, very hard for computer vision to manage context, to manage the unknown. And so this is clearly, we all know this is a stop sign. But when the researchers introduced an image into the software, into the algorithm, the machine, the image recognition algorithm, and they just put like a few little pieces of distortion in there, clearly to us, this is a stop sign, right? Well, this is what the computer guessed it was. They said, computer, what is it? And the computer was like, well, that's not a stop sign. That just said speed limit 45, because the computer had never seen this kind of image before. It was unknown to the machine. But to the human, we know this is just some context. Like maybe there was like a feather, a leaf flying in the air. Your brain still goes, oh, that's a stop sign. The computer did this with, they put the stop sign on the side, and then this is what the computer guessed. Dumbbell, clearly we know that's a stop sign. Same thing, the computer put the next thing on its side where they're like, let's just put it completely flat. And they said, okay, computer, what is it? And they said, this is a racket. Clearly not a racket. And so this is actually pretty scary that in all of these things, the human brain, our human brains would know this is a stop sign, but because this is unknown to the computer, they guessed that it was something else. Now, the cost of bad data is, this is just from 2016. It was the IBM survey. It was like 3.1 trillion US dollars. Now, imagine what it is now, where enterprises have tons of data, but oftentimes they lack the context to inform their decision. And on top of it, from this HBR studies, that only 3% of data is actually used at companies to inform decisions. And in a study from even 2018, is that 91% of orgs have not yet reached a transformational level of data usage. So the big takeaway is that data alone paints a very dangerously incomplete picture. It doesn't automatically lead to informed choices, higher profits, or new customers because it's missing that context. And this is something I talked a lot about in my TED Talk that Krishna had referenced. I'm not going to go through it now because you can find it online. But the quick TLDR is just that I lived my time, a period of time becoming a street vendor, living with migrants while I was working at Nokia. And at that time in 2006, Nokia was the largest, cell phone maker in the world, and it was the most famous. And they made these phones that were clearly, not a smartphone back then. But at the time, what I observed by living with migrants, and my story of what I realized, wow, context is super important for enterprises, is that here's a large company, but I was sending them pictures back of migrant workers using phones that look like iPhones, that look like smartphones, but clearly if you look closely at the screen, this is not an iPhone. It is what's called a Shansai phone, which is a copy phone. Based on that data point of living with families for a couple years and like just documenting and really understanding a sociological take of Chinese society and where things were going with emerging behavior, this unknown behavior, I essentially went to Nokia, who had billions of customer data points. And I was like, hey, you have billions of customer data points, but I have just like a few years of observations with 30 or plus families that like they're not going to want to buy your phone in a couple years because this thing called the iPhone that everyone thought was crazy because it was so expensive. Who's going to want to buy it? I was like, hey, warning, I think your company is not going to exist in a few years because everyone's going to want to buy an iPhone, at least, or a copy of it. And this was an emergent behavior. I was like, you're not going to see this in your existing data set. And so anyways, they didn't listen. This is what happened to Nokia at the time when I told them. They were at, this is their $38 per share back in 2007. And Apple was $4.30 a share. And they were like, Tricia, you're crazy. You're an ethnographer and you're not a C-suite person who's been with our company forever. So why would you tell us that, And so I was like, well, I have real observations on the ground. I have real context that's emergent. And so anyways, Nokia didn't listen. Their business tumbled. We all know the story of Nokia. We're all holding smartphones of some sort, right? And we're not holding a Nokia phone. And so the big takeaway is that not everything valuable is measurable. And this lesson is incredibly important because one of my hypotheses for what we have observed at Sudden Compass is that as more companies are using software that relies on big data, and in particular, even more as we're going into an era where companies are using cloud-based enterprise, AI native tools, is that there's an increasing risk of what I call the quantification bias, which is the unconscious belief of valuing the measurable over the immeasurable. I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but when you're like talking to someone and you're like, I know based off of experience and based off of real data that's not quantified, but I saw something happen, or I had a customer tell me this and it sits right with all this other things we're hearing, but you didn't have what your observation was or insight in the form of a pie chart, in the form of math, in the form of numbers. You couldn't say, oh, 20% of customers have said this, so we are at a risk of, XYZ happening in 10 months or whatever. That you couldn't share whatever it is because that person or your manager or your team couldn't have processed the information because it didn't come in the form of numbers. So this is what I call the quantification bias. And it's really, really dangerous because the quantification bias privileges data that only is measurable. That means anything that is unknown, that doesn't have a number attached to it, like what I had shared with Nokia, is really deprioritized and seen as, not valuable. But the thing is, as Rory Sutherland from Ogilvy says, all big data comes from the same place, the past. And big data is the fuel that drives all these AI tools. So if we know that enterprises are at a risk of the quantification bias, and you don't want to become a Nokia, you don't want to be the company that says, oh, we're so comfortable in our numbers. How do we start taking advantage of data as an asset in our organization? Do we just throw data away? I mean, obviously the answer is no. The answer is you want to use these kind of tools, but how do we do it in a way where it doesn't put us at greater risk? And some of those risks you'll hear about later, as Krishna and Joe just had teed up. They're like, we're going to talk about that stuff. Maybe not right now, but we're going to address that later. But the big lesson what I would love for you to walk away with is that you can avoid those risks, the risk of quantification bias, by centering the voice of the customer. You want to elevate the voices of those who are closest to the customer to surface the unknown. And in many enterprise organizations, guess who is closest to the customer? It's all of you. It's all of you who run these functions that are day in and day out. You hear the joys and pains and sufferings and frustrations of your customers. And unfortunately, in many organizations that I see, these functions, the people who run the support functions, are not sitting at the strategic table, at the desk, making decisions with other C-suite leaders. And the thing is that sound decision making, to really leverage data properly, is you must account for the unknown as well as the known. You have to account for the things that have not yet been quantifiable. But we have a problem. We have a major problem if that's what we need to do, because, everyone, many people think they're the voice of the customer. This is one of the biggest insights that we have from our time and working across all these functions, is that if you're talking to the marketing function, they're like, look, I'm in charge of growth. our function has become increasingly more important the last decade. We're the voice of the customer. We actually know how to get people to buy the product. But if you talk to product people, product manager is going to be like, no, I'm the voice of the customer. We understand all the trade-offs, how to build a product. We're actually making the thing that people are using. We unify engineering and research and design. Like, they really see themselves as good. If you talk to researchers, they're like, no, I'm the voice of the customer. We're actually trained to go talk to them, to do focus groups, to go do research, to go observe how customers are doing. We're watching them. We're watching how many times they click and scroll. They think they're the voice. And then if you talk to designers, they really also think they're the voice of the customer. They're like, look, we actually designed an interface. We, took all the things that the products and the engineering people want. Then we took what marketing and research want, and we actually decided it's going to look like this. And this is the UI. This is the UX. These are the features we're going to prioritize. We really know the values of the customer. And then if you talk to like the co-founders or the executive team, they're going to be like, especially if you have a founder who's still around, they're going to be like, I built this company for our users. So thank you everyone for telling us what you know, but I'm the voice of the customer. So, and your customers are like, oh my God, like, will someone just help me? Because, they're probably not in this kind of situation where everyone thinks they're the voice of the customer. They're not getting their needs met. And your support team is like, you know what? We've got the answer. Like, we know what's happening, but they're oftentimes not at the strategic table. They're not sitting alongside, the entire enterprise, the C-suite team or the strategy team and saying, this is the growth plan. This is how we're going to become a customer-centric organization. And so oftentimes it's people with the least contact with consumers that often make the decisions to exclude the people with the most direct contact, which is the customer support team. And that's because in hierarchical decision-making organizations, data goes up and decisions come down. And what we do, what we've been doing at Encompass in our advising is to say, look, we know that data gets sent up from the people who are at closest to the customer. And then the people at the very top force these decisions down. And the goal is, what we say, the shift you need to make in a truly agile organization where you're going to take advantage of all this kind of AI-driven software is that the data and decisions really need to be informing each other very quickly in a truly agile way, in a cyclical way where you get real feedback. And that means involving those who are closest to your customers. And it involves the customer support teams, but it can also involve researchers and anyone who has direct contact. So what I want to end the talk with is to give you 3 concrete things you can do to center the voice of the customer. How do we elevate those who have the most contact with our customer to share unknown things about them? And the easy answer is like, let's just throw more money at the problem, or let's just get better technology. And I would say you're probably doing that already. Those are the easy things. And you have, incredible software already. We're here at SupportLogic conference. This is the best software for, support teams. But even SupportLogic, I love this quote from a blog post that I was reading by Omid Razavi, the chief advocacy officer, who says, about his own company, technology is only part of the equation. It's people who ultimately create value for our customers. The best customer support teams will be those that combine the power of technology with creativity, empathy, and collaboration. And to me, this quote truly shows the values of the founding team, of truly the executional team for SupportLogic, is that this is very rare. We work with a lot of tech-first companies who build software, and they're usually going into their clients, forcing them to be tech first. And I think that's incredibly misleading, because then we see the problems of them essentially being like, well, if you just buy our software, this technology is going to magically just solve your problems. And as you heard in the chat with Krishna in the talk right before with Joe, Krishna was like, it's not just tech, only. Like, tech-led support teams are not the most successful. So what are the 3 things you can do? The first thing is start valuing thick data. Thick data is the opposite of data. So the idea is stop relying only, I'm not saying don't rely, but don't only rely on dashboards and stats and quantitative metrics. Thick data is at most direct, unmediated data from humans that captures the full context of their emotions and stories. It's the findings that big data can't tell you. So big data is like large scale collection with low resolution context. And thick data is that, really high resolution face-to-face stuff. And the magic is when you integrate big and thick data, you get so much more context. And the best companies in the world who truly succeed, who I, really admire, do this. Disney a really great story is where Andy Mooney, who became a new VP, he created a whole $3 billion a year, business based on his thick data observations, where he's standing in line and he noticed that all these people, parents and kids were dressing like Disney characters. And he started talking to them just by him standing in line. He's like, why are you all dressed up? And they're like, oh, we love our these Disney characters. So we make the costumes. And he's like, well, what if, like, instead of, people making them, what if we just made the costumes for them and started a whole business unit? That now became a $3 billion business based on his thick data observation of probably around 5 people, where he took photographs of the families and had conversations with customers in line. But then they cross-referenced it and combined it with all of their big data. And they started doing, really trying to understand the customer profiles of, like, well, let's make predictions of, like, what this business unit can be. Is this the right investment? They worked with the CFO, all of this stuff, all this modeling. And it's the same kind of thing that I did with Nokia, where it's like I had some big data of, like, maybe a couple hundred of people buying smartphones, living with 30 families or so, combining that. If had Nokia combined that and integrated that with big data, they would have realized that they had a big business on their hand, a new business. And the benefits of integrating big and thick data is that you get more responsive customer experiences at scale, faster, more accurate predictive insights, and better curated insights, right? And you get business decisions that are backed by data analysis from human intelligence and machine intelligence. So I ask for your company, if what's your organization, what are you going to do to bring in that thick data to complement that big data for your customer support team? The second thing is prioritize insight-driven decision-making. Stop treating data-driven decision-making as the end goal. So the key is you want to integrate that big and thick data to then create insights and then lead to better decisions. And one of the examples I want to share real briefly is one of our clients, O'Reilly. I don't know if anyone is familiar with O'Reilly, but they're a learning platform. Early on, they started as, those famous tech books where they would have animals on top, learning Linux or Ubuntu, whatever programming language. So O'Reilly, we were working with them, and they said, oh, wow, we are noticing a big drop in attendance. That was our big data. They already had all their quantitative to show, we have conferences bringing, I think it was like, their actual, like, web teams who were building out in e-commerce, right? They have an annual conference. They're like, why is attendance dropping? And so then they talked to and we said, why don't you talk to the customer support team? And lo and behold, and this is before they had software like SupportLogic, I'm sure could have been done much more quickly. But I had to say, hey, actually go talk to your customer support team and find out from people, what are they saying? And they realized through their thick data, because their customer support team was getting emails from people being like, why is your conference in October? We are the ones who build out the website for e-commerce, but we can't go in October. We have to prepare for Black Friday. And their customer support team brought in that thick data, and they're like, oh my God, we would have never known that. And so there was this new insight that they had that perhaps through this, we should not be hosting conferences during Black Friday, which is one of the worst times of the year for the retail industry. And so they brought those insights together and they rescheduled the conference for March, which is a slower time for retailers. So then their goal was to increase their attendance by 50%. So this is a really great example where they went into the third phase of what I call big data, which is generating insights. It's insight-driven decision-making. We are not just relying on the prior eras of data where it's more about data-driven decision-making. And it's exactly companies like this, like SupportLogic, where it's about AI native tools, but that truly combine the power of technology and humans. One of my favorite quotes comes from my friend Janet Eggers, who runs Neurologic. They are an algorithm-driven company that helps companies make better predictive decisions for customer purchases. And one of the things they say is context is everything. It's what makes our algorithms work. We believe the best way to get context is to get to talk to the subject matter experts. We want to talk to the sales team, the customer service team, and the researchers. We don't start projects until we get them in. So the last thing is invest in collaboration and communication. So stop thinking that using data is just a technical thing. We have to start investing in the 7 C's of getting value out of data. Most companies, when they think about using data and really using really great software, they're only thinking about data for recommendations, like collecting the data, cleansing, classifying. We're like, look, most of the magic is in building a culture of communication around your customer and getting cross-functional support happening. So I'm just going to go quickly through this because we're close and I want to leave some time for questions. But I hope that I have convinced you that we can, more big data can lead to better decisions with the right kind of, vendors and partners, but you have to do it in a way that supports context. And I'm super excited that, I saw a few panels that are actually going to hit on many of the things that we just talked about together right now, which is like cross-functional support, creating that cross-functional, that everyone has data, everyone thinks their voice of the customer, but how can the customer support team bring that unifying tool to be like, hey, we have the quantitative big data evidence and the qualitative thick data evidence from our conversations. How can product experience reimagine this support? This is all tomorrow. So I'm super excited it's going to hit on this stuff. And then day 3, I think this is a really great panel that's going to talk about listening to your customer support team. Like, they have so many of the thick data and the big data that you need. How can, once you really listen to your support team and complement that with AI and NLP solutions, what will happen? And finding those hidden signals also supports tomorrow's team, which is like finding that needle in the haystack, which is what I had shared earlier with O'Reilly's story, which is like, that was a needle in the haystack. I think it was only like 2 people who wrote and said, hey, we can't attend because it's Black Friday. But then when they did a larger quantitative survey, they were like, oh my God, everyone else has this problem too of not attending during a Black Friday event. So I'm going to end on my favorite meme that I've seen from ChatGPT, which is, I got 99 problems and artificial intelligence will either solve them or become another one. Thank you so much. And I think we have like a few minutes for questions. This is my email and my Instagram and Twitter. So I look forward to seeing your comments there if I can't get to any of the questions. And I'm going to stop screen sharing.
Tricia, thank you for that wonderful talk. I walked away with a lot of new insights in your session. A couple of things that stood out for me is that you talked about the loop of
Yes.
customer data and the actions. We do have some questions from the audience. I want to run it by you.
Cool.
So one of them was, a lot of the thick data can be dismissed as anecdotes, right?
Absolutely.
What can companies do, or what can individuals do for organization to pay attention to those thick data?
Right. So first, I call it, there's a reason why I think communication matters. That's why I rebranded all that kind of, what's seen as small, touchy-feely things as thick data. Because I was like, well, if big data is legitimate, we just need to rebrand the qualitative, the non-numerical things. So I think communication actually matters, is calling it data. You yourself have to believe this is a data point. It's just not quantitative. This is a qualitative data point. But because a lot of people don't understand what qualitative is, like, let's just call it thick data to make it just as sexy as big data. So you can call it qualitative data, thick data, whatever makes sense for you, right? And that's why I also put a lot of thought leadership work out there so organizations and leaders can take these concepts and use it. So first, I think you have to believe like this is actual evidence. The second thing is to explain to people, like, where do you think your big data comes from? Your big data is just a numerical representation of a qualitative interaction that's been reduced down to something that fits in a spreadsheet or a database. And your big data, our big data, right, that we're collecting as a company, it can only tell us so much. It can say, oh, 20% of our customers drop off at this point. Great. That's a great data point. Why? Well, maybe they drop off at 10 a.m. Okay, cool. I'm so glad our big data tells us this. Why? You're going to hit a dead end the minute you start asking why eventually, however many levels in. So that's when you're going to be like, okay, team, we're all smart people in the room. We should go find out why. We should go answer this question. And if you're in a leadership team that does not want to find out why, I would say there is something in the culture that where, it's not safe to ask why, or it's not, it's a team that is actually not functioning to its highest ability of serving the customer, the client, the company's purpose, which is truly to be customer centric and create products that people will love and want to continue using, because that's what creates a profitable company.
So I think, Tricia, you covered this in your 7 C's, I believe, 7 or 6 C's, right?
Yes, 7 C's. I know.
Culture, communication, collaboration, data cleansing. I thought that was extremely insightful. I think to your point, a lot of people just stop at just cleansing the data and collecting the data, and and they don't culturally import it. They don't put it part of their workflows. They don't put it as part of their culture and communication. I think that is very foundational. I think that hits the root of what some of the questions that are coming up, which is we have those insights. How do we influence people? How do we? So I think the Disney story that you told me was very interesting. Starting a $3 billion line of business from the power of observing customers in the front line. It's phenomenal. And I have personal stories like this from my VMware days as well. A lot of products in VMware were built from looking at support data. So expansion business comes from pain points of your existing customers. Every pain point, it could be in your product or it could be adjacent in your product. And that opens new opportunities for our businesses. But the cultural aspect is very interesting because as the company grows to a certain size, if you take companies like Disney, how would they make a big bet on opening a new line of business that transformed into a $3 billion business? But how do they make that? Do you have more details about that particular story? Is that your organization worked on it, or can you tell us more about it? Or if you can give me a different example, that'd be great too.
I mean, we did not work on it. And I think that I tell that story because I think it's very important that in most big companies, you need the leadership to give people permission. A lot of leaders are like, well, I want my, team to be more into thick data. And I'm like, well, you have to model it yourself and you have to create a culture that gives people permission, because that's the reality. And most companies function very hierarchically. And so the leadership has to give people permission to that. And you have to start by modeling that behavior. But there are many other examples I have where the customer support team, we will go to the customer support team and we will model the behavior to say, let's just go and interview your customer support team. Let's figure out from the customer service, what are they hearing all day? And it is very sad because most companies see that they need to outsource their customer support team to countries who, where they can get cheaper labor. But and that I understand is modern, how globalization works. But I think it's very unfortunate that those people are not treated as part of the customer learning journey. And that if you just go and also learn, there's such a rich field of insights that you can get from them. And so I think that is, some of the examples that we've seen that's what O'Reilly, I cited that as an example where we literally said, you don't need to pay for more research. Your researchers are like, let's go do more research. And I'm like, the research should be done internally. Let's start where we have the data first, instead of creating money and spending more time outside of the company. Let's listen to the people who are closest to your customers and we can learn from them. So I don't know if that answers your question fully.
That truly resonates with me, Tricia.
There's a lot of
totally. You're speaking my language here, so it truly resonates. We're out of time, but so great to have you. I hope people enjoyed what you have to say today.
Awesome.
Thanks, Tricia.
Thank you, Krishna. Bye, everyone.